It's a great joy, particularly for me over these last couple of years, to work with Suzanne Siskel. Suzanne is the Executive Vice President and COO of the Asia Foundation. Previously working for the Ford Foundation, trained as a social anthropologist, Suzanne has served as consultant, university teacher, researcher throughout Indonesia, rural Northeast Brazil, highland Chiapas in Mexico, and brings to our world at URI a level of expertise and engagement that has just enriched our life in her service on the President's Council, our advisory council. Suzanne, thank you for chairing this session.
Thank you, Victor. Well, greetings, everybody. I feel really humbled to be here, and it's just a great honor to be with all of you and to be with this extraordinary panel. I would say yesterday we heard a lot of we talked about very disturbing things, especially nuclear disarmament, the need for that. We talked about existential threats to the planet. We've seen this morning about a lot of healing that's taking place and how we can also be part of a healing process. So now we have a panel in which we have people who are actively working to build cultures of healing and peace building through very practical, but also creative and inspiring and visionary ways. They're people who are able to translate from one kind of community, one kind of sector to another, whether it's academia, business, activists on the ground, peace builders of all kinds. Sometimes people who don't even know they're working on efforts to build peace and heal the earth, but they are. So we want to talk about how we bridge divides. There's some very practical examples. And we hope that this will be an inspiring time for all of us. And we hope to come away with some concrete recommendations and calls to action that we can all participate in. We have a wonderful group of people here. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Dr. Elsanousi, tried to be with us. He was going to be on the screen, but he's actually on his way to the UN for very important meetings representing URI's peace-building work there this morning, and unfortunately he couldn't join us, but he sends his greetings to all of you. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. There will be a couple of films, so we have a little audio-visual here. I think it's been working really well. I hope it continues to work well. And I would just like to say one of the things in this panel was supposed to be linking grassroots and policy, but I really liked Sadhuji's formation, which was ground level and grand level. I thought that's a much more poetic way to think about the linkages that we're all trying to create. I'll just introduce them, and then they're going to go in order, and then we'll have some conversation and some calls to action at the end. So on my immediate right is Dr. Kate Cumbo. She's the executive director of PeaceJam Foundation, which in an amazing way links youth and Nobel Peace Prize laureates to build inclusive communities. Rabbi Serena Eisenberg is the regional director of the American Jewish Committee of Northern California, who works tirelessly to advocate for the human rights of Jewish communities and disadvantaged communities around the world. Dr. Brian Grimm brings a very different perspective, and one that I think maybe hasn't been heard enough in this meeting. He's the president of Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, and he works with business leaders and will help us understand how they play and can play a really important role in the peace building work we're all trying to do. Reverend Susan Hayward is a senior advisor at the U.S. Institute of Peace for Religion and Inclusive Societies, and she'll probably talk about the multidimensional ways in which she and others look at the causes of conflict and unrest and peace, and how we can bring multidisciplinary perspectives to addressing them. And Akila Joji, who's the vice president for programs at Give to Asia, which is an organization that brings resources from the United States, philanthropic resources, to people all over Asia for disaster relief and all kinds of transformative work that they're doing. So without further discussion, I'd like to turn it over to Kate, who will speak to us, and she has a short film as well.
And how do you turn it on?
Just on. I think it's on.
On. It's not on.
I think it goes on when you talk.
Okay. It's not going on as I talk.
Yeah,
Is it?
that's
Okay. So I just want to stand up for a minute and acknowledge my pants. So these pants are my crazy pants. And why I wear them is because they represent for me the 14 Nobel Peace Laureates we get to work with. So I have the orange of the Dalai Lama. I have the hot pink of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and those of you who know him loves to wear pink. I have the beautiful, let's see, for Rigoberta Menchú, maybe some of this red right in here too. She wears her beautiful traditional Mayan clothing. And I can go on. And each of these faiths are represented in my crazy pants. So because I work with 14 Nobel Peace Laureates and young people around the world, I just gotta mix it up a little bit, right? We gotta be our authentic selves. And I think sometimes these conferences where we sit on a panel and you guys are listening passively and we're trying to give you these words of wisdom, and it's strange, and young people don't put up with it, so I'm gonna try and be entertaining and engage you in this process. So the PeaceJam Foundation was founded in 1996 after a summer of violence, and our co-founders just had this crazy idea, like these young people are carrying guns and they don't see any hope for themselves, and they're willing to shoot each other and over these like small conflicts in their communities, but really it was like this building rage. And they said, what if we put these kids together with Nobel Peace Laureates? Wouldn't that be cool? Well, that's how it started. So Dawn Engel, one of our founders, happened to know the Dalai Lama from some work she was doing when she was in Congress. And so this is back in the 90s, right, when you can actually get access to the Dalai Lama. They borrowed money, flew to India, and actually got an audience with him. He said, nobody's ever asked me to work with young people before. He's like, I'm in, but I'm not going to do it by myself. You have to do it with all my other friends, these Nobel Peace Laureates. So then they had to fly to South Africa and cold call, and sit on the steps of the Desmond Tutu's house and be like, hey, we had this great idea. And he was like, you guys are crazy. Betty Williams from Northern Ireland said when they showed up at her house in Ireland, they were like, I just was afraid of you. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. Just go away. And now, 23 years later, this is our family. So they're just like, we're there for them and they're there for us. And so now we've connected them with 1.25 million young people around the world. And we do that through curricular programming, and we do that through conferences that we host in very diverse areas around the world, where we actually bring them face to face, the good old face to face, right? Where they get to study the life and work of a laureate and then actually spend 2 days with that laureate working on issues that matter to them in their community. So this is a service learning curriculum, so the young people have to go solve a problem in their community. The Nobel Peace Prize winners did not win a Nobel Peace Prize by complaining about issues, right? And Jody Williams from the International Campaign to Ban Landmine, my favorite quote of hers is, emotion without action is irrelevant. So that's the basic foundation of PeaceJam. And I think your beautiful slides about let's get going here because we're not going to survive, our young people all feel this. So if you are 30 years or younger on this planet, please stand up. Do we have any? All right. 2 of you, 3 of you, awesome, 4. All right, 5, 6. So yeah, at heart. I was hoping you were all going to stand up. But the strange thing about youth is it's transitory, right? Like, we all were youth, and all of you who are youth are actually going to be us, as terrifying as that is. So I think the thing we have to think about is, first of all, our young people today we're calling them the next great generation, right? They are fearless. You are fearless, and the resentment isn't there. You're like, yeah, you guys have messed it all up, right? Your systems don't work, yet you still keep trying to work within them, and we're just going to do it a different way, right? And so our job as the adults is we have a lot to teach, and we have systems that we do need to keep teaching them. We think democracy is pretty good, right? So we're going to keep teaching that. But the idea is that in our work, we picture the Nobel Peace Laureates, the moral authority of the world, the people who have been doing this work deeply in their communities, linking arms, walking side by side and in union with these young people, and they're leading this march. They're leading us out of the dark, right, into this light, and the rest of us You can't have a march without people, right? So that's where we all come in, is we all have this expertise we bring to this party, right? And it's this march that we're all taking, and we're not taking no for an answer anymore, right? And so we're calling all of the youth within our hearts. All of us are young people too. And I'm calling all of you to understand that we all have a role to play here. And I think, we know that. So with PeaceJam, we have an invitation for you all too. So we're a youth organization, but as I just explained, is these young people and these Nobel Peace Laureates cannot do it without every single one of you. Right? So let's get more PeaceJam programming and these laureates and their lives out into your communities, out into your countries. We're in 41 countries. We have curricular programming, but we have actually host conferences in 12 to 15 places a year. So South Africa, we're in Liberia with Lema Bowie, we're in Ghana, we're in the United States, we are in East Timor with Jose Ramos Horta, our Nobel Peace Laureate there. We're in across Europe, right? But this is the kind of things. We already have the curriculum. We have the Nobel Peace Laureates. This is just a beautiful way that we can kind of help our young next generation help us, right? So we can talk more about PeaceJam and things like that, but I want to show a short video, and we have a beautiful website, and I'll be here for the rest of the day so we can talk more, but I want to leave time for our other beautiful people up here.
PeaceJam is a year-long program, basically an after-school program with teachers and mentors. They do service projects, and they learn about Nobel Peace Prize winners who travel around the world and inspire them to make their communities better.
The curriculum is really unique in the sense that it centers on the life and the work of these Nobel Peace Prize winners. You think about the Dalai Lama, what was he doing as a little boy, and how did that impact who they became? How do you transform the troubles in your life into a purpose?
In every region and every year, we have the PeaceJam conference, where a Nobel Peace Laureate comes to the conference, where they actually get to meet the students in person. It's an amazing transformative experience for these youth.
PeaceJam South Africa.
Who got the power? We got the power. Who got the power? We got the power.
There has been incredible progress in South Africa, and the optimism you feel in the country is palpable. We're going to be there with Lema Bowie. She's one of the most powerful speakers and people that I know. She won the Nobel Peace Prize for helping end the civil war in Liberia by bringing together Muslim and Christian women. She knows how to bring you up and make you feel like you can change the world.
Young people, each of you carries some passion, something that you want to do. When I was a little girl, I used to dream. And then my dream changed because of the war. I was dreaming about becoming a pediatrician and that I would treat children. When my dream changed, I kept asking myself, in all of those war years, what else do I have that I can contribute to the world? Do you have a talent? Do you have your voice? Are you like me, nosy, that you can jump into other people's business and try to bring common sense to a situation? We all have special and unique gifts. How do we use them to build our community?
I think we'll now turn to Rabbi Serena.
Kate, is this on? Yeah. Kate, that was a really hard act to follow because I'm dressed like a Democratic nominee hopeful. Trying to jostle my way in a really big state. It is so inspirational to hear about Nobel laureates as moral exemplars, as inspirations for our youth. And as I've been at this conference and have gotten a chance to know Victor, each of the people
here are really that kind of inspiration for one another and for the networks and the communities that you're engaged with. So I feel so honored and blessed to be here. And going back to the outfit and the fashion, I am actually wearing something notable and unique. It's my kippah, and it's not as exotic and beautiful as some of the hats in the room. But I'm mindful as a Jew that wearing a kippah makes you a target. I'm so blessed because I have my first grandson on Monday, and we'll be hosting a bris on Monday. And to be a Jew in the world, to welcome him into the covenant with the circumcision is actually to create a bullseye. Throughout our long history, we've been a persecuted minority. And so I'm well aware that to be proud and out and loud, we're in San Francisco during the week of Pride, is extraordinarily important. I work for an organization called the American Jewish Committee. It was founded in 1906 by German Jews who came to America and achieved just the smallest amount of financial prosperity. And their first act was to turn to their brethren in Eastern Europe who were suffering from pogroms. At that time, unimaginable attacks on Jewish communities when 26 dozens, hundreds of Jews were killed in small towns in Poland, including my own relatives. And so that group of German Jews founded an organization, the American Jewish Committee, and their first act, because in 1906, we here know what happened, there was an earthquake in San Francisco. They raised a little bit of money and sent it to the beleaguered Jewish community of San Francisco to rebuild their synagogue, Temple Emmanuel, if any of you have been there. And over the years, it was actually immediately evident that for Jews to advocate for the welfare and security of our own community, we must do that in partnership, in coalition, to advance the rights of all religious minorities, of many other communities. And as a minority group in this country, as we've achieved a really unprecedented privilege, not for all, but for many, of our community members, we must do everything possible to leverage, to utilize that privilege to be a light, to advocate with and for other communities, both in the United States and around the world. And I'm so proud to be part of an organization that does exactly that throughout our history. So just as a few examples, I think the first amicus brief that AJC wrote was for the Catholic community because the Catholics, as a minority, were not able to send their children to Catholic schools. So the Jewish community wrote to advocate for them. Later, in building this interfaith dialogue with the Catholic Church and with the Catholic community, it led to, in 1965, some of you here are going to be able to pronounce this better than I can, Nostra Aetate. And that was a really groundbreaking acknowledgement of the Catholic Church that they needed to stop blaming Jews collectively for the death of Jesus and move forward to really counter anti-Semitism actively. And at the same time, the American Jewish Committee was working tirelessly for civil rights and wrote a landmark brief for Brown versus Board of Education. So fast forward, what are we doing now? This organization has 37 offices around the world. It's no longer an American organization, it's global. 37 partnerships with other Jewish communities. Of course, I think of Jewish community as the ultimate kind of grassroots network because we have little communities all over the world. And we have throughout our history, except for the times when we've been expelled and had the resilience to start over. And so building on these partnerships, we actually continue to advocate very assertively, both for the welfare of the Jewish communities in the countries where for the Jewish communities in those specific countries, as well as in partnership for others. So just as a few examples, and there are a lot. As you know, last October with the terrible shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue, which killed 11 and injured 7, within hours, the American Jewish Committee began to strategize, what can we do? And we built upon our incredible network of relationships, creating a hashtag, Show Up for Shabbat, that was within 1 week seen by over 250 million people. Senators from around the country, religious leaders, including some of you, legislators, celebrities, so many people retweeted this. And what they were doing was encouraging the Jewish community and others to show up as allies the following week, Friday night and Saturday morning, because it's very scary, as many of you here know, to show up at a religious community. I've been a congregational rabbi, in fact, here at Stanford, to invite your congregants to come when you could be the victim of terrible violence. It's terrifying. And so just this Show Up for Shabbat campaign with 250 million tweets by celebrities and congressmen and senators around the world was so heartening and such a show of encouragement and support. In fact, here in San Francisco, we had many, many synagogues that participated, and we had diplomats and legislators who showed up that next Friday. And that became a model, truly, because when Christchurch happened, of course, we already had our ready network to show up for others, to show up at the mosques. And there's many other examples I can give, but lastly, I'll just say I came from our national conference in Washington, where we launched just a few weeks ago a community of conscience, which is faith leaders from many different traditions in America calling upon all of us to 9 principles that will combat hatred and amplify the shared values that we have. And sometimes it means countering the hatred within our own communities, the extremism that we face within religious communities. Often it means combating the hatred that we might experience from our own government, to try to break through the rhetoric that dehumanizes, that demonizes one another, and instead amplify opportunities for civility. So as one example, we do have a National Muslim Jewish Advisory Council that does just that. Civic, business, religious leaders from around the country, of Muslim and Jewish leaders, coming together, advocating in Washington and around the country to combat hatred, specifically sponsoring particular legislation. They've had some success. And to also just show a model, to affirm that these partnerships are flourishing at a time when others might seek to promote the images or the stories of communities tearing one another apart, to silo or divide us, instead seeking every opportunity to promote the stories of where we are coming together. So that's just a little bit, and I know I want to make sure that other people have an opportunity, but thank you again so much for your time.
So I guess we have to do a fashion show. So for business, I want you to note, the tie, the jacket, the pants. That's business, right? No, it's not. Yesterday morning, I missed the sessions here because I was invited to Salesforce, which has the tallest building west of the Mississippi in downtown San Francisco. Salesforce is a huge company that just had a multi-billion-dollar merger with another company, and I was invited to come and talk about religious diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And the group that invited me, everybody had T-shirts on. I was the only person in the whole building with a tie. So just like this panel, where I'm diversity, by the way, in that building, being a white guy with a tie on, I was totally sticking out. So I increased their diversity quota. Well, what is, in Salesforce, they have employee affinity groups, like many large Fortune 500 companies do, where employees can come together and support the business's mission by collectively coming together around identities. So they have different kinds of identities, LGBT, women, different races getting together, and religions, and they have a group called in Salesforce, they have a group called Faith Force. And this group invited me to come and speak. The head of their diversity was there. And Faith Force is pulling together people of different faiths so that they can come out. That's how they express it. That in the workplace, they can come out as a religious person. In a major, I won't mention the corporation, but a major corporation in New York City, there was a man that came out as LGBT. He was a top executive and came out as a religious person. And he said coming out as a religious person was harder. So when you think of business, think of people. Think of people in T-shirts, not ties. They have 20,000 people working downtown in Salesforce. And they give tens of thousands, and they have some data that's not published, but they give tens of thousands of hours of volunteer time to religious groups across the city, like soup kitchens for the homeless and other types of faith-based organizations. They can opt in to give some of their salary to any charity they want, and they're giving millions to faith-based charities. So when you think of business, think a little differently. Now, I'm going to use the rest of my few minutes to show you a video of 12 of my friends. And again, I'm trying to get you to think about the potential of business in peacemaking. So every 2 years, my foundation, the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, together with the United Nations Global Compact, that's the organization in the UN to bring businesses together to support UN goals, we give awards to business leaders advancing interfaith understanding and peace. Well, this is something all of you can do. Find businesses that are doing this or encouraging them to do this and nominate them for the awards. Well, here's the video, my 12 of my friends. I have many more. This is just some of them. And you can see what these business people are doing to advance interfaith understanding and peace.
When immigrants relocate to Brazil, Jonathan Berezowski and his organization Migraflix help to economically empower and integrate newcomers into society. Through workshops and events, Migraflix allows people to embrace each other by first understanding customs and culture. Groups within the Middle East have different narratives about what has created culture and current events. Aziz Abdusera and Scott Cooper of Meji Tours recognize that allowing multiple stories to be told is a first step in fostering peace and cultural understanding. Frank Fredericks, founder and CEO of Mean Communications, led his organization in a coalition with the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, UNESCO, and other partners to produce a coordinated social media effort to spread awareness for the worldwide campaign Do One Thing for Diversity and Inclusion. Both through her organization and individual involvement, Kathy Ireland has supported the Hardwired initiative to empower leaders in advancing freedom in the face of religious oppression and has raised the call to defend Yazidi women in Iraq. Perpetuating the trend in Indonesian poverty is the fact that many people lack the basic government documentation required for formal jobs. YW Junadi has used his business know-how to host mass weddings that allow Indonesians to get marriage licenses, which allow their children to obtain legal status and receive education and other government benefits. Witnessing extreme poverty in Mozambique, Don Larson, founder of Sunshine Nut Company, started a business that works to revive the country's economy by providing work for tens of thousands and donates 90% of its profits to rescue local orphans and strengthen the community. Fuad Maksumi has watched the effect of Islamic fundamentalism on the youth of his country, in contrast with the good his own son was able to accomplish through business, and has used his organization to empower thousands of young entrepreneurs to establish sustainable businesses and hundreds of thousands to receive vocational training. The Foundation for Religious Literacy, created by Bruce McKever, helps professionals comprehend the business value in understanding and embracing religious pluralism in the workplace through its collaborative lectures and seminars. Baroness Nicholson, founder of the Amar Foundation, has championed the cause of helping displaced Iraq women, regardless of faith or ethnicity, to cope with the horrendous atrocities of war, providing mental and physical health treatment and offering resources for recreation, education, and vocational training. Seeing the struggles that many immigrants face when relocating to Canada, Abdo Ibrahim El Tassi works to provide training and development opportunities for newcomers. He has provided $1.7 million to immigrants in interest-free loans for business startups, mortgages, and university tuition. Taiba Taylor, 1952 to 2014, was a tireless international voice for Muslim women everywhere. Through her magazine and advocacy efforts, she helped people of all faiths to broaden their perceptions of the lives and potential of Muslim women as she worked to reveal their true accomplishments and talent. Conflict in Uganda has left many widowed mothers without the means to provide for their children. Brittany Underwood uses her mission-driven enterprise in order to empower local women through industry, giving them the means to provide for their families and escape crushing poverty.
The two DC-based folks showed up wearing basically the same uniform, which is not a surprise if you live in DC. I'm Susan Hayward. I'm with the United States Institute of Peace. Now, first, just a poll. How many of you are familiar with the U.S. Institute of Peace? Raise your hand. All right, that's decent. So for those of you who aren't aware, surprise, I have some good news. The U.S. government has a Peace Institute. It was created in 1984 by an act of Congress in order to support nonviolent, non-military means of preventing and responding to international conflict. And we do that through providing research and analysis, trying to glean some of the best practices from grassroots, from elite and civil society organizations, from various governments around the world about the means to prevent and manage conflict nonviolently, by providing tools and courses, online courses that are available for free. You can go to our website, as well as other kinds of action guides, and manuals to support various methodologies for peace building, whether that's mediation, nonviolent direct action, and so on. And by working with organizations and foreign governments around the world to support both official peace processes and peace building work. So we have various offices around the world. And all of this is supported by, for those who are Americans here, your taxpayer dollars. So please do visit our website. Visit our website, support us, and find some of those resources on our website that I hope can be useful to you. So one of the things that we were tasked with doing here today in our panel was to talk about the relationship between grassroots peace building and policy making. So I just wanted, from the perspective of DC and USIP, to offer a few observations about what I think is distinct and particularly effective about interfaith peace building efforts to shape or inform policy-making decisions in Washington, D.C., and in some of the other global capitals around the world. So one thing that I think really makes the interfaith or the multi-faith peace-building perspective distinctive is the way in which it has the possibility of bringing a very multi-perspectival and multi-dimensional approach to understanding what drives conflict and what is necessary in order to drive peace. We know that conflict is driven by multiple factors, economic, social, political, and so on. And that in order to address these very complex challenges that drive fragility and drive violent conflict around the world, it's going to require, there's no one approach that's going to work. There's no one solution, whether that's economic or political or social or religious, that's going to solve it. And it's not going to be solved by any one community, any one government, any one civil society sector, any one religious or ethnic or gender group. It's going to require a whole of society approach in order to do that. And I think the multi-faith perspective can offer that kind of a systems approach, a nonlinear approach, a multi-dimensional, multi-perspectival approach to understanding these various drivers of conflict and how to create a more systemic and wholesome approach to transforming the multiple drivers of conflict and violence, as well as bringing some of the diverse coalitions. I can tell you that in DC, there's a lot of groups that are advocating just for their tribe, that are advocating just for their national group, their religious group. And so what makes really distinctive the multi-faith groups who are trying to inform policymaking in DC is the fact that they're not just advocating for their own tribe, that they're recognizing the need, as Serena was saying, to advocate for one another, recognizing how these various drivers of conflict are often, and violence, are often mutually enforcing. And so they need to be collectively addressed, that the violence happens against one group is often fed by and fuels violence against other groups as well. And so that ability to advocate across different tribes draws the attention of policymakers, and I think can be very effective and persuasive. I would also say that there was a lot of focus yesterday on the religious drivers of violence and discrimination, and I do think that the multi-faith perspective and advocacy has a distinct role to play in addressing some of those religious dimensions, but I would also encourage you to think about how religious actors and religious groups also have distinct understandings of some of the other drivers of conflict as well, political and economic. And so the extent to which the multi-faith perspective can address the religious as well as some of those other drivers of conflict, I think is what makes them particularly effective. And to that end, the various traditions that we come from have millennia of dealing with violent conflict within their own societies and have come to understand what drives conflict in ways that are overlapping across traditions, but also bring particular insights and perspectives from the different traditions. And what I think is remarkable is that when the different advocates or perspectives from different religious communities bring what makes distinctive about how their tradition understands the drivers of conflict and how to support peace in order to create that more holistic approach to peace building. So for example, when Buddhist communities are able to articulate the ways in which greed and anger and ignorance, the three poisons, are a driver of conflict, and so what it means to build peace from a Buddhist perspective, understanding also some of the social psychological elements that can impact and fuel various cycles of violence. And the Abrahamic perspective on structural forms of injustice, political and economic, and so on. All of these are offered different insights as we all, as blind men and women touching the elephant that is peace, see different perspectives, different components of what drives violence and peace. And it's that holistic understanding, because it's the social, psychological, it's the structural forms of discrimination that are all factors in driving violence and support peace. So the extent to which we draw from the religious traditions and the experiences and offer those particular insights from those perspectives and do it as a coalition, I think it can be very persuasive in DC. And then finally, one thing that as noted, I am an ordained Christian minister, and I'm working in a quote-unquote secular institution within Washington, D.C. And I sometimes see my job as being about helping to serve as an ambassador between the two worlds. I've been trained in how to speak the language of policy and wonk, and I also come as a person of faith who is seminary educated and knows a bit about theology. There's still a lot more I need to learn, but knows a bit about theology and how to use the language of God and meaning and so on in order to talk about some of these issues related to violence. I see, as I navigate between these two worlds and try to help them communicate with one another, that there's a great deal of education that's needed on both sides in order to be able to speak to one another effectively. And so the extent to which, in the policy-making world, I seek to encourage a more nuanced understanding of the complexities within and across different faith traditions, and about the kinds of priorities and the ways in which people of faith address these issues, and address some of the biases within the policy-making world sometimes that folks sometimes hold about people of faith, and seek to broaden that perspective in order to help them communicate better and develop relationships with faith communities. I'm doing that at the same time that I'm with faith communities, seeking to help them understand how policymaking is done, how to translate some of their concerns into language that's going to be effective, and speak to some of the legal issues, the political issues, and so on. And so so I encourage you to continue to do that kind of education of yourselves in order to be able to navigate effectively within those halls and speak that language at the same time that you do not ever diminish what makes you distinctive as faith actors, which is precisely that bringing that human dimension and that divine dimension that is at the heart of so many of these critical issues that decisions are being made about in Washington, D.C. So you sometimes need to know the language in order to speak effectively to those who speak that language, but from within your own frames of meaning, if that makes sense. And so I can add some more recommendations in the discussion, but just as a start, I think there's a great deal to reiterate that the multi-faith and the multi-dimensional and the faith-inspired perspective that you bring to understanding what drives violence and how to support peace can bring to the policymakers and the policymaking decisions in DC. So thank you.
Hello, my name is Akila Jogi. I'm representing an organization called Give to Asia, which is quite different from some of the other players here, but I'm incredibly honored to be here on the table with such wonderful panelists. So in my short career, I'm recognizing I'm quite young here, I had dedicated my career to working with nonprofit organizations across the world. I've primarily worked in countries with significant Muslim populations, and I was working with young people, amazing young people, who are dedicated and activated to help their communities in amazing ways. And I was working with local organizations, grassroots organizations, through the means of education in India, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Israel, Gaza, all around the world. But one thing that kept facing these organizations, that kept coming up when I was working with these grassroots organizations, was where am I going to get the money from? How am I going to be sustainable? How do I connect with funders that are in Western countries and or European countries to become more sustainable? How do I continue doing the good work that I know is important for my community? How do I keep growing? How do I keep helping? And money was such a big aspect to that, unfortunately. It was, and there was such a gap of knowledge, of understanding how do I make relationships with donors? How do I bridge that gap? And so, as I was going through my career, I landed at Give to Asia, and Give to Asia is an organization that does that. It helps bridge that gap between global organizations that are based in the United States and with local grassroots organizations that are based in Asia. We've been around for about 20 years, and our entire mission is to help strengthen grassroots organizations and strengthen grassroots communities by building trusted networks with US donors. So we work with companies, Fortune 500 companies in the United States, as well as families, high net worth families, who are interested in giving back to their communities in Asia, but don't know where those organizations are, or don't know how to support those grassroots organizations. And on the other hand, we're working with local organizations in 25 different countries across Asia who are doing incredible work to help strengthen their communities, educate their children, alleviate poverty, and reduce conflict and violence in their communities, but need more funding and more support. It's been a learning process for me, right? Because I'm coming from the grassroots communities aspect, and I'm coming into this world of business. And what I learned first and foremost is that the gap exists primarily because of language. It was just how people dress, right? And how people talk, and how people understand each other. There was a common platform that there are people in the business world who want to help. They want to give back to the local communities. There are families here in the United States that want to give back to local communities, but they don't speak the same language. And so our role at Give to Asia is to help make that bridge, how to create that bridge. And I can share some of the lessons I've learned. I've learned that families and companies in the United States often have a deep vested interest in helping the communities in other countries. But they often are quite scared of the word conflict, or they're scared of the word violence prevention, because they're worried about controversy. And so what we oftentimes tell local organizations is we have to be very careful about how we put together proposals. We have to use language that other folks can understand. And we have to use and highlight intersectionality quite a bit. So, for instance, if we are talking about violence prevention in the Philippines, it's often quite helpful if proposals are framed in a way that other folks can understand. And one way that's quite successful is if you use education of youth, or livelihood training, because those are words that other folks can understand on the corporate side or the business side. And so how do we create a bridge for companies to understand what important work is happening in the local communities just by using different words? I've also learned the importance of building relationships with employees. And you mentioned this. There are employees and companies that want to give back. They want to give back to religious communities, and they want to give back to their communities in areas that are far away and remote, but they don't know how. And so I've learned that it's really important for grassroots organizations to build relationships with businesses and to cross that bridge and to network with folks that may not speak the similar language than you. And then one other aspect is the reason why Give to Asia supports local community-based organizations is because we understand that local community-based organizations, more than global organizations and more than we would ever know here in the United States, understand the complexities of problems in the communities. Grassroots organizations know how complex situations are. They're invested in the community, and they're not going away anytime soon. And because they understand the complexity of the situation in their communities, they're more likely to come up with solutions and interventions that work, that are more effective. And so, I just lost my train of thought. And so working with the local community-based organizations is really, really important. But companies oftentimes are very siloed in their funding, and so they may not understand the complexity of the situation, but they only fund particular areas. So, for instance, Salesforce, we just mentioned Salesforce, they tend to fund education issues quite a bit. And so coming up with a proposal that addresses the complex situations in the countries and the complex violence issues in various different communities is important, but if you focus in on education, you're more likely to be successful in getting attention and support and funding from players, global players across the world. So some of those are lessons that I've learned, but there's so much more that can be gleaned when you're trying to build connections across bridges. But it is important to know that there are global organizations that are deeply invested in supporting local communities, and there is a gap, and how you bridge that gap is something that we need to be creative about and think outside of the box. But we are all on the same page, and we all want to support and make the world a better place. It's just a matter of language oftentimes.
Thank you. Well, we have such a... Yeah. We have fashion show, yeah, right. Yeah. I thought we have such an extraordinary panel, and some of these people know each other and work together, some of them don't. And I thought I'd give any of you the opportunity to ask a question of one another, or maybe to draw out something from one of your colleagues that you might think is really important that they haven't mentioned yet. Does anybody have a question or a comment among you?
I'm curious, we do a lot of work with, so the religion program, I forgot to mention, the religion program at USIP is actually the oldest thematic program at the Institute. It was created in 1989. And we've done a lot of work throughout the years to ensure that our work within religious communities is inclusive and is diverse, that we're working with male religious leaders, female religious leaders, old religious leaders, young religious leaders and actors. And across different religious perspectives. I'm curious because it can sometimes, what we hear cited from older religious actors and younger religious actors is concerns about that generational divide and about how to help to foster and facilitate some of the relationship building and some of the communication bridge building, as we've all been mentioning, that's needed between the generations. And you hear frustrations from some of the young people that when they get together with the senior clerics in particular, they're just getting preached at, and they're not necessarily being heard for the perspectives and the insights that they bring and their hopes for how to move forward. So I'm curious about what you've learned about how to foster some of that that constructive intergenerational divide and relationship building that really is going both ways.
So the first example I'll give is, so PeaceJam is education, inspiration, and action. So the inspiration of the laureates and the young people and all of us, but really the laureates coming in with their inspiration. The education is we have curricular programming where they address the root cause of like different dimensions of problems. And for example, in the Dalai Lama's chapter, they're talking about compassion and what that actually means and what it actually looks like and what are the skills you actually bring out into the world. But the third piece is this action piece. And so we have a Billion Acts of Peace campaign where our Nobel Peace Laureates have all gotten together and said, these are the 10 most pressing issues facing the planet. Let's work on these together. Since then, the UN has come up with the sustainability goals. They align perfectly. And so all the young people have to do a project. Right? And they can't do like a volunteerism. They have to look at the root cause of a problem in their community. So they often have to go, and there's certain questions in the curriculum they have to go through, like who makes decisions about this issue, right? What else is being tried? You know, like they have to actually get the statistics, and they have to get 2 to 3 different perspectives and experts on that issue from various different perspectives and camps, so to speak, so that they can really understand it so it doesn't become groupthink jam. Right? And so when we brought this, when we were working with the Dalai Lama in the Tibetan Children's Village several years ago, the Dalai Lama was like, we're all about like self-enlightenment, you know, and he was like, we got to learn something from those Catholics because they're all about service. And so he sat down with the young people, and here over 50 years, the Tibetans had been guests and honored guests in India, and yet they don't serve at all to give back to the Indian community. So we were able to work on a water project with them. And so the young people not only worked with the Dalai Lama on this, but they had to work with the local water officials, and they were trying to get some water down to a shanty town, a slum. And so they first bought them all these beautiful buckets to collect the water, and all 300 families said, we have no water. These are beautiful buckets, but we have nothing to put in them. So they had to go back and start working with the spiritual leaders of the community are always the gatekeepers, right? And so they had to begin to get permission from those. The Dalai Lama was one of them, but the Indian leaders were also. Then the politicians, and they had to start bribing politicians to be able to build this pipeline. And so that was just sort of one example. But we were just in Ghana, and we were doing the young people were doing this project in a local community, and we all had to go and have a formal meeting with the chiefs, and the young people had to do a formal meeting with the chiefs. And it was all about that root cause of a problem that they were going to work on together. And so it was like an invitation, but it was also an acknowledgement that we can't solve the problem without the adults giving us these resources and permission and walking with us. And for the first time, it was like these adults were being approached by young people who already had an idea of what they wanted to work on, what they wanted to do, and were inviting the elders of the community to join them. And the project changed because of that dialogue, right? They couldn't do everything they wanted to do, and they had to tamper some things down. But the point was that those kinds of projects end up being sustainable because they've been sanctioned by the adults, and the adults start to get involved. We had a cholera cleanup in Ghana one year. The young people were like, okay, so we have these cholera outbreaks, and it's from trash and sewage in these gutter things. Why don't we just clean it up? So they got permission to go and clean it up, and then they went out and did community education. Well, they pissed off some of the local officials who were like, wait, you can't just go do that. And they were like, we just did. And so then they realized that antagonizing your adults isn't helpful. So they had to, the next project they did, they made sure that they brought those adults in the beginning of the conversation and a facilitated conversation of how can we work together to address this issue. So sometimes they have luck, sometimes not, but it's because they have to work on an issue that they cannot do in isolation. Action always helps that bridge that divide.
Thank you. Anybody else want to ask a question or make a comment? Serena.
I'd love to ask about working in a government institution in Washington, and this probably applies globally to some of the governments which are becoming increasingly nationalist in other areas in Europe, et cetera, around the world. How do you how does that impact your work? If I've heard mixed things about the way certain organizations in Washington are getting funded or defunded, depending on the administration. Just curious to know more.
So one of the advantages of being at USIP, it's an independent federal institution, which means that we're created by Congress, we're funded by Congress, but our independence is protected in the sense that we don't have political appointees at the top of our leadership. So when the political winds shift, when new administrations come in, we stay steady. Our leadership stays steady, and we stay focused on our mandate and our mission, which allows us to weather some of the transitions and the storms that happen in DC. That said, we're going to be impacted when there are some of these shifts, and we've gone through periods of a great deal of support from the Hill or from various administrations, or some skepticism about our mandate and our mission. I think what we seek to do in the midst of that is just stay connected to the grassroots and to the peace builders around the world with whom we're working, to stay focused on supporting them, to put our faith in the work of the peace builders around the world that are doing good work, and to continue to lift their stories in DC with the conviction that by so doing, that speaks to the worth of peace building generally, of offering these kinds of solutions to these complex problems. And we've been able to weather the storm. So, 35 years later, we still exist, and we're still continuing to do the work. And if anything, we continue to grow in our ability to do this work. And we have a great deal of advocates across the different political parties and also across different sectors. So we actually faced a period of a little bit of existential crisis several years ago, and it was actually a lot of the folks within the military who came to our defense. Just as General Mattis was saying yesterday, it's often the seasoned soldiers who yearn the most for peace, who understand the scourge of war, and who understand the worth of diplomatic or nonviolent grassroots peace-building efforts in order to address local security issues, in order to ensure that war is not necessary. And so they've been some of our most powerful advocates at times of threat to us.
Thank you. Brian, I have a question for you, and it's probably one you get very often, which is, how do your business colleagues come across as genuine and really trying to show that they're not just, I don't know what sometimes in the environment we say greenwashing or whatever, or what are they doing to ensure that people understand that they're genuinely committed and they're not just doing like good CSR because they have to?
Yeah, well, some companies don't put a priority on social engagement. And all companies need to make money or they don't exist. So that has to be the beginning of our understanding with a business. But there's many different initiatives to help give tools to business to be visible about what they're doing. And so, for example, on the sexual orientation, maybe many people are familiar with the Corporate Equality Index that the Human Rights Campaign developed. My foundation, together with the Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding in New York, developed a corporate religious diversity assessment tool to help companies take an assessment of how well they're doing on being open and inclusive as it comes to religion in the workplace. So I think some of these tools that come from NGOs, the United Nations, the UN Global Compact has developed some measurement tools to see how well they're putting to practice the SDGs. So, as the saying goes, if you don't measure it, it doesn't count. And so I think that that's one thing that we can do to help them. And I found that companies are not they don't object to these tools. So the tool that we developed on corporate religious diversity assessment, we had 3 major corporations help work with us to develop that. So companies, I could say this, companies that are really doing something actually want to show it off. And I'll just give one example. Accenture, the global consulting company, their name actually means, Accenture means like accent on the future. That's what their name means. Last year during the National Day of Prayer, they had an opt-in day of prayer for all their employees in the United States, so in the National Day of Prayer. And they didn't advertise that. You know, they're not trying to get points for that. So I think sometimes you can see what they're doing by what they're not publicizing. So if they're tooting their horn and that, you know, it doesn't always mean they're really doing that. But I found that many companies are engaging and they're not, you know, they're not trying to get credit for it. And something you said, companies are, no, I lost. You're contagious. I just lost my thought.
It's lunchtime.
I know, but yeah, and I'll say one other thing. We often don't know how to talk the language of business and talk to them. And so Biff, sitting back there in the back, said, well, when you're there, Brian, see if they'd be interested to work with URI. And URI, I don't think, has ever asked them. And I said, would you all be interested to be in contact with URI? And they said, what's URI? Was the first question. And I explained a bit, and they said, sure, introduce us. So you know, I think there's a lot that we just think business is, you know, the big, you know, bad polluters or whatever images we have. But sometimes if we just ask and reach out to people we know in businesses, they'll be responsive.
Great. Well, before we conclude, I thought we'd just have a quick lightning round, starting with Akila, for takeaway, whether it's some really great recommendation or a call to action that we can all go off to lunch with and think about.
I should just lose my track of thought right now. Reach out and learn each other's languages in different sectors.
So as I was saying, the multi-tribal advocacy is very powerful in DC, and that goes not just across different national, religious, gender groups, but also against different civil society organizational groups. So when you have different civil society organizations coming together to advocate for something that goes beyond just their project, then that can also be very powerful in DC. I'm gonna add one more if I can really quickly. There's a realm of advocacy called Women, Peace, and Security that is about understanding the particular experiences that women have in violent conflict and their priorities in peace building and ensuring that those priorities and their participation is centered in peacemaking and peace building work. And there's often an absence of faith-based groups and religious groups in some of those advocacy efforts. So I'd also make a recommendation to find out about the realm of women, peace, and security, as well as youth, peace, and security, and others, and participate in some of those as faith actors, because you have a very powerful role to play in some of those efforts.
So I would say take out a piece of paper and a pen. Really? I'm waiting. Okay, you can write it on your iPhone. That would be modern. All right, write down these words: Global Business and Interfaith Peace Awards. Global Business and Interfaith Peace Awards. You can Google it. And I challenge you to find a business in wherever your spheres of operation are, whatever countries, and find a business that's doing something in the area of interfaith understanding and peace, and nominate their CEO for one of those awards. So businesses love when people recognize the good they're doing. And that's the best approach to business, is not to come in and say, oh, would you fund me? Would you do this? Would you do that? But say, I really like what you're doing. I'd like to see you get recognized for that. Positive approach.
I have several, so I'll
Great.
try to be
Go
quick.
ahead.
And I think about them in the category of oys and joys. Oys, for those of you who don't speak Yiddish, means the heartache, and the joys are obvious. So the negative and the positive, sacred attunement to both sides of that same coin. So starting with social media, we know the oys, the just virulent spread of hate speech and terrible, vicious ideologies online. But when we look at social media, we have to also consider the incredible power to amplify the good. I mentioned that within 1 week, 250 million tweets to rally people to show up in person. When the German ombudsman told German Jews just a few weeks ago that it's no longer safe for them to wear kippot, their yarmulkes, in public, a German newspaper published a picture of a yarmulke and encouraged everybody to print it out and cut out that little circle and wear it on their head. So the oys and joys of social media, of media, the press, we can amplify this for the good. Number two, when I look at the oys, I mean that we have to be really vigilant about the ways that we are really looking to combat bigotry and hate. The head of my organization, David Harris, calls it wearing trifocals. We have to be looking for hate from the extreme left, from white supremacy, and also from political, religious extremism of several different kinds. And it's often the case that we might call it out for the political party that's opposed to us, for political means, but rather we really need to look within and see it within our own left or right or religions, and just be vigilant about the ways that we're really trying to identify the nuances of that. So that's the oi, but what's the joy? The joy is to amplify the good. We talked about amplifying uplifting role models, uplifting partnerships. I want to close by uplifting our faith traditions. Today in the newspaper I saw Senator Gillibrand at the Homestead Migrant Detention Camp. And I didn't pay any attention to her because my friend, Rabbi Robin Fisher, was next to her wearing a T-shirt that said, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. We should love our neighbor as ourselves. We have to hold up these values and wear them on and be proud to share the truths of our tradition that are universal human truths in ways that will inspire all of us. So the last thing I'll say is just, it's coming up on the 75th anniversary of the UN, as was mentioned last night. It was founded in San Francisco. Our organization, the American Jewish Committee, is planning to host a series of events in San Francisco in the next, in the spring of 2020. We're looking for partners. The diplomatic, the interfaith, legislators, all people who can come together and really explore the power of global diplomacy for a peaceful future. So please see me if you have any interest in getting involved in those programs.
All right, I'll be brief because we're starving at this point. Engage the young people in your community. Those are the young people both that are already leaders and showing leadership in your faith communities, but also just around issues that matter to you. If you don't have half of your team being young people, then you're doing all the work for no reason, right? So, so the other is look for the young people who are the unlikely leaders, right? This could be your own children, your own nieces and nephews, and bring them in. I just brought my nephew to Ghana, and now he's like on fire and going to help me with a whole bunch of social media stuff. So remember that this generation is waiting to be asked, and they're not going to continue to ask for long. So go ahead and reach out, grab them, because they're going to just pass us by. We're honoring 12 of the world's greatest young leaders right now for our Hero Awards. We have Greta Thunberg from Sweden, as well as Little Miss Flint, who's cleaning up the water in Flint. The young people in the United States, it's Youth versus the Government. They're suing the U.S. government for the environmental degradation. litigation. There's 21 plaintiffs on that, and some of our Native American communities are part of that as well. These are just a few of them, some young entrepreneurs who are really working on racism in Alabama and some other things. So again, you can go to billionacts.org and vote for and help us kind of bring some social media presence to these young people and their projects. So thank you. And I want to give a shout out to Monica Willard. So Monica is the board chair of PeaceJam Foundation. And so I just want to thank you for inviting me here. And Monica, you are I.
Yeah, I don't need that. Well, I just want to end the fashion show. I didn't plan on this, but I'm wearing a dress actually it's from Cambodia, and that doesn't look very native, but it's got all these intertwined threads that looked very chaotic to the person who made it, but they made it all fit together. So I'm hoping that in the spirit of fashion, which I hadn't planned on, that we're all seeing the connections and the ways in which we can all work together, even if it doesn't seem likely, to really build peace in the world. So thank you all so much.
Let's thank our panel for this wonderful presentation.